Good evening, folks. This is Matt Buckman here, Director of Referee Development for CNRA. It is 7:05, so I'll go ahead and get us going. As usual, please click the raise your hand icon. Make sure everybody can hear me. Wonderful, thank you very much. Okay, so as usual, just a couple of housekeeping items. Due to the number of people on the call, we will not enable everybody's ability to speak. So if you have any questions or comments or want further clarification on something, please use the chat feature. Please do not use the Q&A feature, as that's a little bit more cumbersome to check and clear off, but please definitely use the chat feature to ask questions. I will present the information we have to go over tonight and discuss various considerations, and then at the end of each clip, we'll leave some time for people to enter questions into chat, and then we'll go in and answer those questions. So over the last couple of months, we've been looking at a variety of different kinds of fouls in the game. We, a couple months ago, looked at how to recognize lower body fouls. There was one where we looked at how to recognize handball. And tonight we're going to talk about what to look for misconduct, specifically on the lower body, any kinds of misconduct situations that we have on the lower body. So we'll go through a little bit of what we mean by misconduct, and then we will go through a video analysis after we talk about the considerations that we want to look for when attempting to identify misconduct. So again, just a quick summary for the laws of the game. We have three levels of I don't like the word punishment, but punishment, for lack of a better word, when dealing with fouls that happen on the field. If we have a careless foul, then just simply blowing the whistle and awarding a free kick for the opposing team is the first level of punishment or repercussion for somebody who commits a foul. The next level up is if we have a reckless challenge of some kind, we can issue a yellow card, a caution, for reckless challenges, tackles, things of that nature. And we'll talk about these to some degree here in a couple of minutes. And then the next that we have is for serious foul play or violent conduct, a red card. And again, we'll talk about some of those considerations and what they look like. So we'll go over the FIFA considerations for lower body challenges and then take a look at some clips. So first of all, these are some of the things we want to be thinking about when we identify a lower body foul of some kind. And what we're talking about with lower body is obviously the foot, the leg, things like that. More often than not, these are going to be slide tackles or lunging challenges. So some considerations we want to think about: what degree of speed and or intensity is the player using when making the challenge? Oftentimes this is how fast are they running? Did they jump into the tackle, or they just stick their leg out? What level of speed or intensity is that player using? And the reason we want to consider that is because one of the things that comes about due to speed or intensity is the amount of force in a challenge. And force is going to have a lot to do with what kind of impact it has on the opponent when that contact is made. And so when we're trying to figure out if a foul was careless or reckless or serious foul play, we want to be thinking about how much speed was involved in that challenge. Does the player far exceed the necessary use of force when making the challenge? So again, we have normal gameplay, we have normal challenges, what we would consider to be normal for the game of soccer. And then if players go beyond that, then do we think about how we handle those kinds of fouls in the game? So again, if they are within the normal realm of what we would consider to be acceptable for whatever level of play that we are officiating, then we might just have a careless foul. If they go a little beyond what was probably necessary, then possibly we have a yellow card for a reckless challenge. If they far exceed the necessary use of force, and that's where I want to really emphasize the words far exceed. If they far exceed the necessary use of force when making that challenge, then we're probably leaning more towards serious foul play and want to think about potentially issuing a red card. Does the player use brutality against an opponent when making that challenge? Again, this has a lot to do with that same concept of exceeding the necessary use of force. Brutality, we know what that word means. Did they swing an arm? Did they punch somebody? You know, what kind of physicality did they utilize when making that challenge? And was there an element of brutality to it? Does the player show clear malice? So that's one where, you know, maybe the ball is not in playing distance, but the player goes ahead and kicks somebody or jumps into a tackle where there's no attempt to play the ball whatsoever, just, you know, deliberately trying to hurt a player. Does a player show malice when making the challenge? So I'm going to give you a second to screenshot these 4 considerations because I want to come back to them and others so that you can refer back to them when we're looking at clips. So take just a moment and screenshot that, take a picture with your phone, whatever you'd like to do. All right, moving us along to some additional considerations. Which part of the body has the player used to make contact? We're going to talk about 2 terms here in a minute that will help us narrow that down. But we want to think about which parts of the body the player is using to make contact because there are different parts of our body that can do more damage to an opponent if we use them. For example, if someone just does a basic hook slide where the contact to the opponent is with the top of their foot or with their shin or something like that, then that's probably going to be less risky to the opponent than if somebody jumps in with the bottom of their studs exposed. And so we want to be thinking about what are the dangerous parts of the body and what are the not dangerous parts of the body when making contact with an opponent. Anything that has to do with the studs making contact with an opponent, depending again on the amount of force used, is going to probably kick us up to wanting to think about at least a caution. And then where force is involved, do we think about serious foul play? Does the player use the studs when making a tackle? So again, a lot to do with number 15. Number 16 asks directly, does the player use the studs when making a tackle? If they are using their studs, that is automatically a more dangerous part of the body to be using when making a challenge, and we want to consider the possible impact to the opponent that results from that kind of a challenge being made. On which part of the body is, of the opponent's body is contact made? So again, the same way that we're thinking about on which part of the body the defender uses to make the challenge because of potential dangers, some surfaces being harder than others, we also want to think about the same thing for the opponent's body. If the contact comes to the thigh, that's an area where you're going to not do a lot of damage to somebody because it's a good meaty part of the leg. They can absorb contact without really getting hurt. You know, it may not feel good, but they're not going to get hurt as a result of it. Versus if someone steps on your Achilles. Your Achilles is a highly sensitive part of your body. It does not take a lot of contact to create injury. And so a tackle to the Achilles is probably going to be treated a little bit more harshly than a foul that makes contact with the thigh of an opponent. The same goes for the knee area. The Achilles and the knee, when we talk about 2 lower body fouls, are 2 of the most sensitive parts of a person's leg. And so any kind of challenge that targets the Achilles or the knee are highly likely to be dealt with more severely than a tackle that maybe, again, makes contact with the calf or with the foot instead of the Achilles or with the thigh. So again, which part of the opponent's body are we making contact with when we have a foul? In which direction are the tackler's feet pointing? And again, if the studs are out and exposed, that's going to create a lot of potential danger versus if the feet are pointed towards the ground or if they're pointed away from the player and they're making a hook tackle or a sweeping tackle. Those different kinds of hints about what the player was doing when committing the tackle are going to help us to make that decision. So it's interesting, I think, with these 4 considerations in particular, that you have to be thinking about what the player was doing when they went into the tackle. A lot of times when we call fouls, we see something and we react to it once it's already happened. And what you'll see with a lot of these is we have to be paying attention before the tackle happens or as it gets started so that we can see things like which direction are the tackler's feet pointing? What are their studs exposed when they're making the challenge? Those are all things that we need to pick up on before the foul actually occurs. And so we have to know when we're anticipating a lower body foul to look for those kinds of things so we can make those determinations and help us get our decision more accurate. So take a moment and screenshot those 4 considerations as well, so that we can refer back to them in a couple of minutes when we're looking at videos. Are there any questions at this point about these considerations and how we utilize them? Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. All right, then moving us along. So with lower body challenges in particular, point of contact is a term I want you to start being familiar with. The point of contact is where on the opponent's body a foul was suffered. So again, if somebody fouls me by kicking me in the knee, the point of contact is my knee. The knee is the point of contact. That's where on the opponent's body a foul has been suffered. And the mode of contact is the part of the body that the defender or the person committing the foul uses when making that challenge. So again, the humorous analogy I like to use is if I punch somebody in the face, the point of contact would be that person's face. The mode of contact would be my fist. The point of contact being where on the body of the person suffered the contact, the mode being what I used to commit that foul. Those are 2 terms that we use a lot when we're evaluating challenges so that we can identify the level of misconduct based on the point of the point of contact and the mode of contact. Any questions on that aspect of it? Mode and point of contact. All right, then we'll just jump into some video clips. Again, feel free as these videos are playing to ask any questions you have via the chat feature, and I will answer them at the end of each clip once the presentation, or excuse me, the analysis has been made. So here we go, the first clip. I'll play it again for everybody so we can see it a couple of times. I understand some of you may have a choppier view. So the last time, and I'll pause it a couple of times here. So this is the first moment as a referee that we need to recognize that a challenge is going to happen that we need to pay attention to. Leading up to this player in red here has lost possession of the ball and now is going to try to commit a tackle to win that ball back. And you can see here he is starting to leave his feet. So now we need to pay attention, because if he's going to go to ground, we know we have a potential for a lower body foul to happen. And so we want to pay attention to what this player does with their feet. As you see the tackle come out, this is where you start to recognize we've got a problem. This is not a normal way for a player to be making a tackle on the ball. Anytime you see somebody jumping into a tackle like this with their studs exposed, the legs straight, and this high off the ground, we immediately need to be thinking about the fact that this is a potential for a dangerous tackle. And then when we keep going, you can see here he jumps in with both feet. And another little clue here is he actually goes over the top of the ball. You can see the ball down here and his legs and his studs well beyond the ball. Again, this is not a normal way of committing a tackle. Normally, if we're trying to tackle the ball, our feet are going directly to the ball, this player's feet are going over the top of the ball. And so this creates some potential for danger to this opponent because this player is not actually trying to win the ball here. He's trying to put a tackle in on the opponent. So now when we see this kind of motion where a player jumps out like that, we're already thinking this tackle is probably exceeding to some degree the necessary force that is required for making this tackle. And then when we see the rest of how it goes, again, this being a warning sign, if this player was trying to play the ball, his feet would be going into the ball right now. Instead, his leg is straight out over the top of the ball. This is potentially very dangerous for this opponent. And then when the second foot gets involved, we know we have a problem. So now when we see this, we know we're either going to have a yellow card for a reckless challenge or a red card for serious foul play. And now is when we're going to get into the analysis of the point of contact and the mode of contact. As you can see here by this freeze frame, he doesn't actually make any contact with the opponent with his studs. That means the tackle is significantly less dangerous because he has not made contact with the studs. If he jumps into this tackle and the point of contact is somewhere on the leg and the mode of contact is these exposed studs like that, then we're probably going to have a red card for serious foul play. But instead, as you can see here, this player very luckily, when lunging through with his feet, ends up wrapping his legs around the player's ankle. And so the only contact that really happens is this red player's thighs sort of coming around this player's ankle. And so because of that, we would want to show a yellow card for this for a reckless challenge. Definitely a foul, obviously. We can assume everything that we're looking at today is going to be fouls because we're only talking about how to recognize misconduct. So in this scenario, when a player jumps into a tackle like this, and you see them jump, feet off the ground, studs exposed, this is clearly beyond the normal way that we see the game of football played. And all these warning signs need to tell us that this is a reckless challenge. But because he doesn't actually make any contact with the opponent with the studs, we're going to be comfortable showing a yellow card here. Any questions on this clip? So we had a question here, is this a foul or a misconduct? So I want to make sure I define this term a little bit more clearly. A foul is a foul. Misconduct is, do we show a yellow card or a red card? So misconduct in our terminology is a yellow card or a red card. So it's possible for something to be a foul and a misconduct or just a simple foul. So if we have a careless foul, that would be just a foul, no misconduct necessary. If we have a reckless tackle, then we would have a foul and a yellow card, so the misconduct would be yellow card. And if we have serious foul play, then we would have a foul and a red card for excessive force, serious foul play, that kind of thing. We have a question here. Could it ever be a red card for a player attempting to seriously injure a player but fail to? A lot of that depends. More often than not, we're going to judge the outcome of what happens. So if a player flies through a tackle and just misses, then it's probably just going to be reckless and yellow. In fact, we'll see a clip, I think it's the next one, that covers that a little bit. But if someone just makes a clear effort to hurt somebody and you need to show a red card to keep control of the game, then the laws do give you the ability to do that. So question here, one thing I always hear is, I got the ball first, so there was no foul, almost regardless of the follow-through or excessive force. How do you respond to that? There's a consideration that we use, and I would point you back to the webinar where we talked about how to identify lower body fouls. Because again, tonight we're talking specifically about misconduct, but when we're talking about recognizing lower body fouls, then There's a specific consideration that FIFA uses that says, does the player make unfair contact with the opponent after playing the ball? What that means is if you make unfair contact with an opponent, even after playing the ball, it's still a foul. And so when someone says, I got the ball first, it can't be a foul, then the easiest way to respond is you made unfair contact with an opponent after winning the ball, which FIFA says, or which the laws of the game say is a foul, and just move on. To the degree that you can quote the laws of the game, the better off you're going to be. And specifically, it does say in the laws of the game that you can't make unfair contact with an opponent after playing the ball. So we hear that a lot. I got the ball. It can't be a foul. Yes, it can. You made unfair contact with the opponent after touching the ball. Still a foul. Question here, what if they commit to a reckless challenge, but the other player fights back? Doesn't matter, frankly. It's one player has the ball, the other player commits a reckless challenge. If somebody suffers a reckless challenge, we want to call a foul, and we want to give a yellow card to the player who committed the foul. Now, if that player gets up and pushes somebody or kicks somebody or something like that, that's a whole separate issue. But if someone commits a reckless challenge like the one that we saw just now, we want to show a yellow card to that player who committed the foul. So we had a request to play this back one more time at full speed. So anytime you see somebody come in with 2 feet like that, it's really got to heighten our awareness. This is not a safe way to play the game of soccer. So we don't want to allow challenges like that. And that kind of studs exposed, flying into a tackle like that, particularly this early in the game. You know, a lot of referees will try to manage their way out of cautions early in a game. And my response to that is, do you want tackles like this happening throughout your entire match? Because if you don't sanction this with a yellow card the first time, then that's a license for everybody to do it throughout the match, and we don't want to do that. We had a question here, does the referee give a yellow card here? I actually don't know, and for our purposes of clip analysis, it doesn't matter. We don't want to watch clips to analyze what the referee did. We want to watch clips to learn from what the players did and how we would want to respond to it in the game. So as we watch clips together, folks, and this is just a general learning thing for everybody, let's not pay attention to what the referee did. We don't want to criticize what they did. We don't want to talk about what they did, because until we referee a game at the professional level, we don't always have a good understanding of what they're going through in doing that. So we're going to focus less on what the referee did in these games and more about what we would want to do if we saw that tackle. All right, moving us along to the next clip. Watch it again. All right, so one more time and I'll freeze frame it. So we had a question during the last clip where someone said, you know, what if someone just comes in and really clearly tries to hurt somebody, but is not successful, basically? This is a good example of a tackle where, given the amount of speed involved, had this orange player actually made real contact with the green player, it would have done quite a bit of damage. Because the green player sees it, right at the last second, he pulls his leg out of the tackle. This is also a very good example of the question we had earlier about what happens when you get the ball first, but then make unfair contact with an opponent. So as you can see here, this player very, very clearly gets the ball, goes through the ball, but as you saw watching in live speed, watch how fast he's running when he makes this challenge. And a couple of hints you can use here when we're talking about how we can evaluate. He's going to ground here. He's about 3 yards. But let's keep track of where the ball was when this happened. So it was right about here when it happened. look how far through the player that tackle went. He slid a total of probably 6 or 7 yards here when making that challenge. Think about the sheer amount of force you have to use to slide 6 or 7 yards on the ground. That's a lot of speed and a lot of force. So one would argue here, or ask at least, did this player use an amount of force that was necessary, or did this player exceed the amount of force that was necessary? I think it's very easy to say that this amount of force was not needed for this kind of tackle. And again, you can see after the ball goes away, the studs are out and go through the foot of the player. So some things to think about with this one. A lot of speed, a lot of force, unnecessary for this kind of tackle on this part of the field. Now let's ask ourselves what we talked about earlier. Does the player, what is the mode of contact and what's the point of contact? So if we just fast forward a little bit, you can see here the mode of contact is definitely the player's studs, the bottom of the foot of the orange player is what is being used to make contact, which is going to heighten our awareness for potential misconduct. Now we have to think about how serious is this going to be for the player. Because he sees it coming and he starts to back out of the tackle a little bit, the orange player actually only makes contact with the green player's shoe. He makes contact with the foot, which is a very hard surface. It's not going to feel good, but you're not going to do a lot of damage to somebody by making contact with the side of their foot or the top of their foot. Now, if this same tackle comes through at the knee or into the back of the Achilles, now we're talking about a kind of tackle that can actually hurt somebody, or in the laws of the game, as we reference, endanger the safety of an opponent. And so because this contact stays low onto the foot of the player, we would want to show a yellow card for this tackle, not a red card. Definitely exceeds the amount of force is necessary, but doesn't touch the green player anywhere on their body where they're actually going to endanger the safety of the opponent. So for that reason, with this tackle, we would want to show a yellow card. This is clearly a reckless challenge. He's not really thinking about the potential for damage to his opponent. He's just flying in to make a tackle in a very, very reckless manner. So if we see a tackle like this in a game with this kind of speed and this kind of force, where he actually makes contact with the opponent like we have here, we want to show a yellow card. It's a very, very unnecessary tackle, and you can see how everybody else reacts to it. They are not happy with that kind of tackle, and everybody knows it because it's definitely not a tackle we want to see in the game. Any questions on that video analysis? Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next one. We'll watch it one more time in real speed so you can see the amount of force that was used. And that right there is what we want to look for. So again, the things we want to think about when we're talking about potential for misconduct. We want to think about the speed and the amount of force that was used. So what I would ask you to do is compare the speed and the force that was used in the last tackle to the speed and the force that was used in this tackle. And the big thing to think about is the distance covered. Because we all know to build up a lot of speed, you have to move for a bit of a distance to build up that speed. In this clip, right before the blue player commits the foul, he's got the ball here, he goes backwards, and you can see he's basically within a foot or two of the ball when he realizes he needs to put in a challenge, and he just reaches out with his leg and mistimes it. So the amount of force that is used in this tackle is significantly lower than the one we watched last time where the player ran a good 40 yards and just flew his body into a tackle. So there's already a lot less force involved with this challenge. But the big thing we want to look at here is the way the contact was made. And again, we're going to talk about point of contact and mode of contact. The mode of contact is absolutely with the studs. It's the bottom of the shoe, the studs making full contact with the opponent. That's going to pretty much automatically raise us up to a yellow card. When we're making contact with an opponent with our studs, we're almost always going to go with a yellow card. But because the point of the point of contact on the opponent is, again, the top of the foot, which is a very hard surface, that means the potential for danger to the opponent is very low in this scenario. So because the opportunity to endanger the safety of the opponent is low here, we only need to show a yellow card for this kind of a tackle. So anytime we see a lunging challenge like this where contact is made to the top of the foot, we probably will have a yellow card. Now, I don't want you to confuse that with someone just stepping on somebody's foot on accident. Those are two very, very different things. I don't want you to go out in your games this weekend and Matt said if you make contact with the top of somebody's foot, it's a yellow card. That's not what we're talking about. The difference here is that this player has lunged out, which means he is extending some force into the player and is bringing his studs down onto the top of the foot. Contrast that with if he's running past somebody or steps to the side and just, steps on somebody's toes or their foot. We don't want to issue a yellow card anytime the top of somebody's foot gets stepped on. Really what we want to talk about is these lunging challenges where the tackle is mistimed and the studs do come clattering down into the top of the foot with some amount of force. And this one, as you can see here, the player is stretching his leg out. He's reaching, which means there is a little bit of force involved. Not anywhere near the force that we saw in the last one, but this is definitely making some contact to the top of the foot in a way that's not going to feel good. Question here, does the blue player get a bit of the ankle? The answer to that is maybe, but probably not. So you can see here, he's reaching, he's reaching, he's reaching. If he did make contact, it's possible with the toes onto the shin, but not any kind of consequential way. As you can see when he comes down, really what we need to be worried about here is the shoe coming down on top of the foot. This is definitely bottom of shoe onto top of foot, which is what happens when the player jumps out of it. You can actually see it here even a little bit better. The bottom of the shoe just really coming down onto the top of the foot. Now, this is going to be difficult for us to pick up in game, so we have to be looking for it, but this is absolutely a reckless challenge for which we want to issue a yellow card. Now, again, we have a question here. What was the outcome of this clip? As I mentioned on the first clip that we watched, we don't care what the referee on the field did. We don't want to ask that question. We don't want to consider it. It doesn't matter. We want to look at a play, and we want to decide what we would do with the information we have available to us. So with this information, we want to show a yellow card to the blue player here for a reckless challenge because, again, the point of contact is the top of the foot, which is a lot less dangerous, but the mode of contact is still the studs, and there was still a little bit of force used. Any additional questions with this clip? All right, then I'll move us on to the next one. Watch it one more time in real speed, and then we'll go back and look at it. So there's two key parts to this clip that we want to look at. And again, as I talked a little bit when we were looking at the considerations, I said we need to be paying attention to what players are doing before a potential foul happens. So with this one, we want to be identifying the two players involved in this. So at this moment right here, we can tell that this player is probably going to go in and put a challenge in. And really at this moment, we probably know this yellow player is probably going to put a challenge in for this ball somehow if she gets close to it. And so we have to be paying attention to what that player is doing as they approach. So I want you to look at how much speed and how much force the player is using when she jumps into this tackle. Watch how fast she's running and watch how she throws her body in. So the speed that she's running and the way that she lunges in means she is not very well in control of her body right now, which means there's a lot of force going into that tackle. So that's the first part of the picture that we need to talk about. Again, we've talked about two bigger picture concepts: how much force is involved, and then what is the mode and the point of contact. So here we can analyze the force part of it and recognize that this player is running at a high rate of speed and lunges out to try to block the ball here, which means she's not in really great control of her body. And then the next thing we want to look at is what is the mode and point of contact. And as we can see here, this is really, really not good. So we have, again, the studs making contact with the ankle. So now, as we talked about before, the ankle is something we need to consider a highly dangerous part of the body. Now, if this tackle happens onto the top of the foot or happens, honestly, even into the thigh, there's not going to be a lot of long-term damage to a player. But because this amount of force from the side has gone into the ankle, above the shoe, into the ankle, we end up with this scenario here where a foot is not supposed to bend that way. Now, I don't know if this player ends up breaking this leg or not, but one's foot should not be laying sideways on the ground while their leg is planted. And so this tells us here that this tackle is really, really highly dangerous to this player in black and white here. And because of the amount of force involved, because of the point of contact, meaning the ankle instead of the foot, which is a highly dangerous part of the body to receive a challenge like this, as well as the studs coming into the ankle, the mode of contact, this we would consider to be a tackle that endangers the safety of the opponent, and we would want to show a red card for this challenge. So we had a question here: would you consider this excessive or reckless? This looks excessive. You would be right, this is excessive, the amount of speed. But really the big part of this one is whether or not the safety of the opponent was endangered. Does this tackle endanger the safety of the opponent? And as we can see here, just by this still frame, this is definitely something that's very dangerous for this player to have happen to them, possibly a broken ankle or a broken leg. So absolutely this endangers the safety of the opponent, and we want to have a red card. Question here, and what about the other leg? It also makes contact. That's irrelevant, quite frankly. If the trail leg comes through and makes contact, that's going to be in a sweeping motion, which is not going to do as much damage as this kind of lunging motion will. So again, if this is a sweeping tackle, meaning this front leg here makes no contact, but the trail leg just kind of sweeps behind the player and takes them out, you're going to have a reckless challenge here, because again, there's not as much danger that comes from a sweeping tackle like that. It's these lunging tackles where we see a straight leg, studs going directly into an ankle or leg of an opponent where real damage could be done. So it's really the first part of this tackle that we have to be the most worried about. So we had a question here about where does the referee need to be able to make this decision. That's a very good question. You can see as this play develops, the referee takes a step out wide here. Oops, I tried to pause it there. It didn't work for me. The referee is actually pretty well positioned to be able to see this, but just turns her head, I think, a little bit too soon. My guess is she's already starting to look into the middle of the field at this point and just misses this behind the ball. Also, awareness of players. At this moment when the tackle is happening, she's going to be looking through these two players. And so you have to be paying attention as you're running towards a play like this, that if you've got people potentially in your way, which she has right now, she needs to go to a spot where she can see beyond them. And so when she takes this step, hold on a second, she's running towards the inside a little bit, recognizes that she needs to go wider. And you can see here, she changes direction and starts to go wider. She needed to go even wider than that to get that angle of view, because now she straightens out her run. She's looking directly between these two players, and it's quite possible that at that moment, that player blocks the view. Whereas if you would have read that those players are in your way and you take another step to the side here, you can probably see that. So again, it's recognizing when players are potentially in your way and moving out so that you can see them. Question here, does the force matter as much as the point of contact or possible injury? So they could not have a lot of force and make this type of injury and still get a red card. That's correct. Again, what's in the laws of the game specifically is we want to show a red card for a tackle that endangers the safety of the opponent. And so if you judge that even with a medium amount of force, a player has endangered the safety of the opponent with a tackle, then absolutely we want to show a red card. And this is one where I would say this is probably a moderate to just above moderate view of or amount of force here. But because of where the point of mode of contact is, this is absolutely something that we want to send a player off for. We didn't need a giant amount of force for this to become a red card. But again, it's because it's onto a part of the body that can be very easily injured. So we have to be really sensitive on tackles from the side into the ankle, particularly onto a planted foot, or challenges into the Achilles. Question here, if you were blocked from the view of the mode of contact, would you then take would you take into account the injury? Potentially, but I think we have to be very, very careful with that. If we don't see something clearly, then there's a chance that we're guessing about the rest of everything. Now, if you walk over there and this player's leg is broken, then there's a good chance that maybe that tackle created that broken leg. But as we saw earlier this year, I think it was in the Premier League, where a player went into a tackle. It was definitely just reckless, but the other team's player actually ended up tripping over their own teammate and broke their leg, and everybody got really – in fact, it was a Tottenham player committed a tackle that looked really bad, but when they went and looked at it in the replay, he didn't actually touch the guy. It was reckless because of how he went into it. He should have got a yellow card for it, but it was actually the contact that the opponent made with his own teammate that caused his leg to be broken. And the referee went over there, saw the way that the player had gone into the tackle and saw a broken leg and tried to connect the two and showed red card. And the Premier League actually came out a couple days later and rescinded that red card because the player didn't do anything that was guilty of a red card. It was just a freak accident. So we have to be careful if we don't see things clearly to punish them, even though we didn't see it clearly. Now, if you go over there and the player's got a broken leg and she's got 6 stud marks on her ankle where the leg is broken, then that's probably enough information for us to piece together and make that decision. But again, we have to be very, very careful when we don't see things clearly, which again is all the more important for us to put ourselves into positions where we can see. Any other questions on this? We have a question here. If you're the 4th official in this game, should you help the referee if they do not see or acknowledge the foul? This is really, really far away from the 4th official, and the referee is a significantly better position. So more often than not, when the referee is positioned appropriately and just misses something, if you are not in a better position to see it than the referee, you're probably not going to get involved, because it's actually going to create more problems for you trying to get involved. Question here, how long should we wait before deciding? I don't know what you mean by that, unfortunately. Before deciding what? So we had a question here, would this be called back as a foul even when a goal is scored? That's getting into advantage. We're not going to talk about that right now. Any other questions on this before we move on? This would be a direct free kick and a red card for endangering the safety of an opponent. Any other questions? All right. Watch it one more time, and then we'll get the replay. So again, earlier we talked about making fair or unfair contact with an opponent after playing the ball. It's a very good example of that. So as we can see here from this second replay, she slides into the tackle, wins the ball right there. She kicks the ball away, no problem. But then as she follows through, you can see the studs go into the shin, both feet, and then she extends the leg out again. So it's not that she doesn't get the ball here, because she does. She comes through, she kicks the ball, but because she has committed this foul or this challenge in a reckless manner, meaning she's not in very good control of her body, she follows through and puts her studs into the shin and ankle of the opponent, and then extends her feet out again to continue her contact. So something to think about when we watch the replay. Again, we talked about where players start their slide and where they end their slide. So she goes to ground here. She's already starting to go to ground there, right there. Watch how far she slides through this challenge. Out to here. Again, another 4 or 5 yards that this player has slid on the ground. That tells us that she's making a challenge with enough speed and enough force where she's really not in good control of her body when she makes this challenge. And so as a result, as we see from the second replay, she goes to ground, kicks the ball away, and then follows through with the studs to the shin and the ankle and extends the leg out again. So a little hint for something to look for here. When she jumps into this tackle, again, I've talked a lot tonight about watching what they do before a foul occurs. Watch her body when she goes into this tackle. She's completely off the ground here. There's not a single part of her body that's at all on the ground, which means she is jumping and flying into this tackle. So if you ever see a player going into a tackle where their body is completely off the ground, that needs to be a red flag for you as the referee, that that player is not in control of their body. And that we need to pay very close attention to what she's about to do because she's not in control of her body. And as you can see here, she's still not on the ground and makes contact with the ball as she hits the ground, but now is going to follow through and put her studs into the shin of the opponent. So because she has gone in with an amount of force that is not necessary, and because that amount of force then puts her opponent in a bit of a compromised position, we would consider this to be a reckless challenge. It's not excessive force. The point and the mode of contact are not in a way that's going to endanger the safety of her opponent. So we don't need to go with a red card, but we do want to show a yellow card here for a reckless challenge. And again, you can see here, goes through it, and you can see both the studs out, raises this foot up, making contact with the ankle. Definitely a reckless challenge. We want to show a yellow card here. Question here, doesn't the opponent have a shin guard? Yes, I'm sure she does, but that still doesn't mean it's okay for a player to put their studs into a shin. If you ever see studs into a shin on a tackle, we're going to probably have a yellow card because the feet need to be on the ground when making a challenge for the ball. There's never a reason for a player's feet to be up this high when tackling for a ball that's on the ground. So a question here, if she had retracted her feet after getting the ball but still run slightly into the opponent, would that be a foul? The answer to that is no. If she had gone into this tackle and tucked her feet back, then we don't have a problem. We consider that to be fair contact. What is unfair about this is that she's leading with her studs, and the studs are what can cause damage to an opponent. So if she goes into this tackle with her legs back, meaning her feet are behind her, and she jumps into this tackle this way, then no, we're probably not even going to have a foul. But it's because she's led with her studs and because she makes unfair contact with the opponent with her studs, we want to show a yellow card. So very good question there. If she tucks her feet back after winning the ball, we don't have a foul. We're just going to have normal contact, and that would be fair. Question here, if contact is shin to shin, would it be a foul? Probably not. Again, because we're more worried about the studs here than anything. If a player slides with their feet tucked back, that's a normal way of sliding. The ground is going to absorb a lot of your speed and a lot of your force in that scenario because most of your body is on the ground. In this case, very little of her body was on the ground before she made contact with her opponent. So again, the question that was asked earlier, a player gets the ball first and then does this, the player has made unfair contact with an opponent after playing the ball. Therefore, we want to show a yellow card for a reckless challenge. And for those of you who noticed how incredulous the player was after the referee showed a yellow card, you can see here, we'll fast forward to the next time this player committed a tackle in a game. When they saw you go down late. Same player. This one earned her a red card. So again, as we've talked about, the two big things we want to be thinking about are speed and the amount of force the player uses, and what is the point of contact and the mode of contact. So you'll pick up the blue player who makes the challenge over here on the left side of the screen. Watch how fast she's running. She's running with a lot of speed when she goes into that tackle. You pick her up right here. You can see she's at full stride right here, and watch her as she goes. Going pretty hard. And again, that is never a good sign. If a player is going into a tackle with that kind of body posture, it means they are using a tremendous amount of force. And then watch how she makes contact. Over the top of the ball, straight leg, studs exposed, directly into the shin of the opponent. Anytime we see this freeze frame, that's a really, really dangerous tackle. Again, if this player is going for the ball, she's not going past it or over it like this. This is a player who is just trying to get into their opponent here. And so the amount of speed that she comes in with, everything about what she's doing right now, she's not at all in control of her body. And that stud out into the shin of the opponent. Significant amount of force being used. Mode of contact is the studs with a straight leg, which is a very dangerous way to commit a tackle, into the upper leg of the opponent. This is a very easy way to snap an opponent's leg. And as you can see here, it's only because the player backs out of the challenge a little bit that she doesn't end up breaking her leg. If this player had gone into the tackle in a normal way, it's possible she breaks her leg here. So again, let's watch this in real time. Referee immediately recognizes it, comes out with a red card right away. Any questions on that clip? All right, then I'm going to skip the last couple here and bring us to a close because we are right at 8 o'clock. Are there any additional questions about what we've gone over this evening? We've talked about mode of contact. We've talked about point of contact. We've talked about speed and force. And we've talked about how a tackle can be reckless or can endanger the safety of an opponent. We had a question here. What if the attacker has more force than the tackler? Would it still be a foul? Possibly a foul, but again, we're judging misconduct here. And so for misconduct, you have to only judge what the player who was guilty of the foul did. And if the player guilty of the foul did not use a lot of force, then we don't want to have that count against them. If the player who's running into them has a lot of force, then that's very, very different. Question here, how much weight do you give on angle of the defense, such as from behind, from the side, face to face, et cetera, all else being equal? It's not necessarily which direction it comes from and more the impact that it has on the opponent who receives the challenge. So for a long time, we always talked about we have to be careful with tackles from behind, tackles from behind, tackles from behind. That was always a thing that we focused on. What they never talked about was the reason we focused on it was because the Achilles is in the back of the opponent. So it was actually less worried about tackles from behind and more worried about tackles into the Achilles of an opponent. So instead of worrying about what side did it come from, was it from the front, from the back, or the side, think about where did the contact happen and was that dangerous? As we saw with the one where the lady probably got her leg broken, that came from the side. But the fact that it came from the side is what allowed that leg to fold the way that it did. If that same tackle had come from the front, there's a chance her leg just moved backwards and it wasn't a problem. So again, don't worry so much about which direction it comes from and more about where on the body did the contact happen and what potential for damage or injury did it create as a result. I hope that makes sense. Question here, in youth games, it's difficult to differentiate between malice and lack of skill. How should a referee balance the call? I would say in the youth games, you need to just think about what the player did and what the outcome was. You're right, it's really hard to look at malice. Malice also has to do with intent. And intent is always a little bit dangerous when we're trying to figure out misconduct. And so if a player does something in a youth game, don't think about intent as much because you're right, it's hard to judge that. Think about what actually happened. If they didn't mean to, but they still punched somebody in the face, we still have to punish it accordingly. If they didn't mean to, but they broke somebody's leg, we still have to punish it accordingly. So don't worry about the malice part, which is the intent part. Think about what they actually did. That's why we focus so much of this on the actual evidence. How much speed, how much force, point of contact, mode of contact. That information should be able to give you all that you need, regardless of malice, intent, lack of skill, etc. I hope that helps. Any other questions? All right, then as usual, thank you everybody for joining this evening, and I wish you all a wonderful holiday, a fun, good New Year, and we'll see everybody in January. Have a good night, folks.